Now that the fundamentals are aside, let's go and start creating some control icons. To start off with, the easiest one to create is just a NURBS circle. So I'll go into NURBS primitives, circle, and I create it. And this satisfies all the rules. It's a single selected object, it doesn't render, and it's easy to select through it. I can scale it. I can even actually take the CV curves and change our shape of it. Like so. And this is all valid. You're not adding history onto the object. So if you are grabbing your CV curves and just scaling them in, things like that, you can make different types of icons, the pointed objects, and so forth. So the circle is a very strong starting point for creating control icons. Just creating normal circles is pretty valid. But I also a lot of times like to add more fidelity, more tessellation to this object by going into the history and adding, taking it from it's 8 sections to 16, like that. So now I could go in here and I can select every other CV in here. And scale it out, and I get these like star type of shapes and things like that, and I can select the whole object after that and scale it down. This will be a type of control that can be used very, very, very often. So circles are great for just creating a normal circle and then creating different types of stars and shapes and things like that. So these are all pretty good control icons. The next one we're going to do is we're going to create square and cubes. We could do these with the circles, but it's kind of hard to do it. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into the CV curve tool, which we're going to create CV curve and go into the options. And we are going to set this, it's default to cubic. And now that when we do this, we just click, 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 and you can see how it's drawing our curve. And when I hit enter, it finishes it, but it's hard to create rigid edges with the cubic mode. So I'm going to go back into my CV curve tool and I'm going to switch to linear. And what we're going to do is to create our square, we're going to just trace around the outside of our grid. So I'm going to hold down X, and that allows us to snap to our grid. Like that, and I just snapped around, I hit enter. And now we can scale this object up, and we got a square. Okay. So how do I create three-dimensional objects? That's great to snap to the grid, but how do I make like a cube? Well, what we can do is we're going to bring in poly objects that are kind of templates and just snap to the verts around the outside of it. So if I go over to create and I create a poly cube, now the poly cube itself violates the rules of a control icon because it renders out. So I just kind of scaled it up a little bit to make it bigger. And now I'm going to go into my CV curve tool again. Let's have it here. And I'm going to trace outside. So I hold down V this time to snap to our points, and I click on the first one, and I click on the second one, third, fourth, fifth. Now, you're going to overlap. It's impossible not to overlap. So don't worry, you're not going to break Maya by doing too many points overlapping. The main thing is we want to get every point represented here. Now I'm making tracing over a lot here, but that's okay. And I'm not even sure if I did this point up here, so I'm just going to come back up just in case. And I hit enter, and now I got my, just translate away, I got my cube. You might have to do this a couple of times, because the first few times you do it, you'll miss an edge. The main thing is that once we have these shapes, we can just duplicate them off that point. So a lot of times I'll create like a little palette tool of control icons and just kind of throw them around, and then I'll duplicate them and use them again. So what if I want to create a pointing device? One way of creating a pointing device is literally creating a circle and just pinching off the edges like this, like grabbing a CV here and just kind of zipping it up. And it kind of makes one of those MapQuest icons like that. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. But I wanted to create actually like an arrow. And this is actually going to be a little more of a compound object. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create I'm going to create a polyplane. And I'm going to create two of them. I'm going to scale them and move around to use as templates. So I'm just going to create a polyplane like that. And I'll scale it up a little bit. I don't need all these extra points in here, so I'm just going to select my subdivisions and turn them both to 1. Okay, so now I got 4 points around here. And at this case, I just want to move this square out of the way. I can scale this down like so. And then I could just duplicate it and just move it forward and scale it out like that. And I could pinch in the tops. So I can grab my vertexes here and just scale them in like that. So now I have two objects that are kind of overlapping each other. And you notice I have one kind of penetrating another one. So now when I create my curve on the outside here, click, 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 click. I'm just going around. So now I have this arrow here, but I can change it any way I want. If I said, oh, this arrow is a little too big on this area here, and I can actually scale these ones in by itself like that and translate it up. And I have a lot of play with these. You can always mess with the CVs on your control icons. They don't add history and they don't add anything invalid to it. So I can even add points on here if I need to be. But they can be scaled and moved around. But the main thing is that you can use all variety of different tools, of snapping and everything. And at the end of the day, if you have a single selected object, in this case is a spline curve that doesn't render out, and you can select through it, it's a pretty valid control icon. So there's a couple of ways. Get yourself used to using a CV curve tool. It will be very vital. And you don't have to bust it out every time you're creating a new object. You just do it once, and you get a variety of different controls, and then you can actually just copy and duplicate them. You can make them a group. You can even import them from other scenes and eventually have buttons that create all these different control icons by clicking on them, and it just pops them into position. And that's pretty much the fundamentals of creating control icons.